Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Day 2 of the Russian-Turkey contest along the Syrian-Turkey border. Critical to announce right now, and we'll develop this in the days and weeks and months ahead, is that Vladimir Putin has responded globally. He has ordered the S-400 ground-to-air defense system to be established at Latakia. You've heard of the S-300. That's on the Moskva off the coast of Syria. Moskva is the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. The S-400 is the best on the planet. It cannot be defeated unless you attack it. That means that Russia has just decided to put a no-fly zone into western Syria, extending into western Turkey. No-fly zone. Will they use it? Question mark. But in any event, one day later, Russia has responded globally by using the best there is, and to my knowledge, the only way to take that out is the U.S. fleet. We'll leave it there for the new Cold War and turn to Asia, because Gordon Chang of Forbes.com joins me this evening, and we're going to turn not only to Asia, but to the question of China in the fight against jihadism, against Islamic State, and China's self-interest against the Islamic State. Gordon, China has spoken sympathetically to Russia's position, to its adventure in Syria. But as of yet, there are no Chinese troops or Chinese sailors deployed to do warfighting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
However, within these last days, the raid in Bamako, Mali, the capital of Mali, the hotel frequented by international travelers and airlines, Turkish Airlines, I think, had a crew in the hotel. There were 3 Chinese nationals in the hotel working for the Chinese National Railway, and they were murdered by the Al-Qaeda raiders, not ISIS, by Al-Qaeda. Now, this is a Francophone country. Perhaps there's a contest between Al-Qaeda, which is the granddaddy, and the Islamic State, that's the wannabe granddaddy. But in any event, 3 dead Chinese nationals. Was there an immediate response? Was there a pushback? Was there threats from Beijing?
Well, certainly China had a rhetorical response, but I don't think that they're actually going to do anything about it, because at this point, I think Beijing has its hands full with other foreign policy challenges.
We welcome Harry Kazianis, executive editor of The National Interest. He's a senior fellow for defense policy at the Center for the National Interest. Harry, does China have a foreign policy that extends beyond its region, beyond its bullying of its neighbors? Does China have a foreign policy that says, you killed 3 of our nationals, so we're going to kill 3 of yours? Something similar to the French and Russian foreign policy in times past. Good evening to you, Harry.
Excellent question, and let me answer that very succinctly. The answer is no. Right now, China does not have a foreign policy that extends globally, but they're going to need one, and I think this is going to be a problem for Beijing going forward in the decades to come. It's very clear they have foreign policy goals when we talk about the East China Sea. When we're talking about Japan, they have goals towards Taiwan. They have very clear goals in the South China Sea, which is to dominate the South China Sea. But when we talk about those things, those objectives are very clear, especially in the South China Sea, whether it's bullying their neighbors, trying to take over that space that's worth over $5 trillion in seaboard trade. But as China goes out further in the world, their economic interests have grown dramatically in the last 20, 25 years. But the challenge here, gentlemen, is that their geopolitical strategy, their interests have gone so far, so fast, maybe the fastest in human history when you really think about it, that China has to start thinking about what a global China's interests will be, whether that's defending its citizens from attack. Because let's face it, they're going to be a target now, just like U.S. citizens or other superpowers, Russia, France, whoever. So China is going to have to start thinking very deeply whether they want to be more interventionist, more protectionist of their citizens, whether it's creating military bases. For example, we had word this week that China is going to be creating a military base in Africa. So Beijing is going to have to think very carefully about what its global footprint will look like. And let's face it, they're going to need to have a global footprint. Their economy is the second biggest in the world. It's worth something like $9 or $10 trillion, depending on how you do the math. So China is going to need to think about this. They're not going to be able to have no grand strategy when it comes to their strategic thinking. Their economy is too big and their footprint is just too big.
Harry, I'm glad John asked you the question first, because it gave me the opportunity to think about it. Can we say, and I agree with everything you say, but can we say also that to the extent that China has a global strategy, it is essentially to support Russia so that Russia can create trouble so that China can sit in the background and enjoy perhaps the show?
Gordon, I think that's an excellent point, and I'm going to draw to a friend of mine who passed away this January, Bill Martell's research. He created a term called the axis of authoritarianism. Basically, what he talked about is different powers sort of loosely getting together. For example, China and Russia, Russia, and Iran. All of these different countries that essentially have very, very widely goals that sort of weave together, which are essentially to sort of buck the international system and to bend it and mold it and shape it in ways that sort of help each other very loosely. And I think when you talk about China and Russia specifically, they are both, their interests are coming together in different ways. They've done a lot of naval exercises together, and in the last couple of weeks, you've seen some extraordinary different military deals. For example, the Russians selling them the S-400, and now the Su-35, a very, very advanced fighter system. So these two countries are getting together more and more as time goes on. They've had different oil deals together. So whether this continues and goes forward, I think is very interesting, and I think could be sort of a little bit of foreshadowing of what Chinese foreign policy will look like, and that will be to find countries that maybe have shared interests, maybe not necessarily shared values, but narrow shared interest in different parts of the world that they can sort of loosely align with. Whether that happens over the long term, obviously China and Russia have very deep historical differences. We will see. But the short-term trends, they're not good, obviously.
You know, if we roll back the videotape 101 years, what made 1914 so dangerous was that the protagonists really didn't understand who would come in with who if there actually were a war. And so the situation was much too complex. Well, you know, when you were talking about China and Russia and some of the interests that coincide and some of them that don't, you know, I think it's very difficult for the rest of the world to say, well, will China actually back up Russia if there is a difficulty in, for instance, the Middle East? Because we don't know how strong that relationship really is. It could be very strong or it could be weak.
I think that's an excellent point. I think it really is going to be situational. I think, for example, when you look at Russian interests in backing China in the South China Sea, a lot of lukewarm statements there, nothing very concrete. But I think if things continue on, if the crisis in Syria gets out of control further and further, I think the support that you'll see, at least at first, would be maybe more advanced Russian military sales to China, keeping in mind that it would make sense for the Russians to do this in terms of gaining revenue to help with sanctions and tightening up that alliance. And then you might see the Chinese in other ways providing, whether it's intelligence or more vocal support that makes the West nervous. But I think as long as tensions keep rising in the world, you will see China and Russia getting together more and more.
Turn of the screw, Gordon. Remember the bombing in Bangkok associated with Chinese tourists visiting the area? And there was pursuit of killers and loose talk about Turkish agents. Recall that?
Right, and Uyghurs as well.
Uyghurs, yes, Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are the East Turkestan. They're Turkic peoples.
Who are subject to a horrific campaign by Beijing to eradicate their religion, culture, and their traditions.
I have heard it said that Turkish intelligence, MIT, is networking with the Uyghurs in self-defense. And that the Chinese are aware of this and understand that Turkish intelligence is a force that cannot be solved by sitting back in Beijing.
Well, absolutely, because if you look around the Muslim world, the only country in the world that supports the Uyghurs is Turkey. Right. And those are Turkic Muslims. So it is not only just an interest, it is blood.
And now Game of Thrones. Turkey runs an op, looks like an ambush, on a Russian high-performance aircraft. Russia's in league with China for developing the Gulf for resources into the future, and certainly for cooperating with Iran. And Russia's aware, Russian intelligence is aware, that Turkish intelligence looks like an opponent of the Chinese when it comes to the Uyghur risings.
It gets extremely complicated. And then you add in that Turkey is a member of NATO.
Harry, don't you like this? Is not this the first chapter, Harry?
And you know what? I'm gonna turn the screw one more time on you guys. If the United States had done more in Syria, and I'm not talking intervention, I'm not talking ground troops, although I don't think you take such options off the table.
If what?
If the United States had done more in Syria to work and solve this crisis, we would not be talking about Turkey shooting down Russian planes, Russia and China getting together. There's sort of a larger narrative that I think that needs to be put in.
Harry, are we talking about the National Security Council run by Susan Rice? Did something happen? Harry Kazianis, Harry Kazianis at Thanksgiving, executive editor of the National Interest and a senior fellow for defense policy at the Center for the National Interest. Gordon Chang, Forbes.com contributor. I'm John Batchelor.